building research establishment which is set up to assist governments to define new standards for buildings. Produced last year 2 documents, one for commercial buildings, one for schools, both nearly 400 pages long, and both mention blinds once. We have a long, long way to go, so we sympathise. But my talk today really is what the BBSA are doing, the British Blinds and Shutters Association are doing in terms of solar shading in the UK, in terms of this project called Shade Specifier, and we're delighted to be able to speak to you today. I think Dick summed it up earlier on in that we have an issue here that is needs collaborative action, needs collective action. We know that global warming is no respecter of national boundaries. We know that conflict in one area can affect supplies in other areas. And we know that we have to work together, both as solar shading manufacturers, but also together with architects, together with engineers, and together with perhaps people who have historically been seen as competitors, such as the glazing companies, heating and ventilation, maybe lighting and insulation. It's a global issue requiring a global solution, really, and collective action. So just a brief overview of the BBSA before I talk about Shade Specifier in particular. BBSA was founded in 1919, so we're 90 years old this year. It's the UK's only trade association for blinds and shutters and associated products. And we represent around about 4,500 staff in the UK, and obviously we're very proud to be not the newest member of ESO, but a very new member. The objectives of the session that I'm going to go through today really is to take you through what Shade Specifier's objectives were, and that was to come up with some demonstrable benefits. We all know from testing that we do as solar shading manufacturers and suppliers that we can reduce heat gain in buildings, we can retain heat in the winter. But it's actually having to prove that in financial terms, which is where the BBSA started from. It was to have something that was easy and simple to use for our trade, and dare I say it, for architects as well, because this is new for them. We're certainly seeing in the UK that building services engineers, the engineers are far more important now in the decision-making process. The architect will design the building, but the building engineer will tell him whether it can be built. And we're looking as well at producing a comprehensive database of solar shading materials, so building services engineers can compare and contrast different fabrics and materials. That data is validated, that someone has brought that data together and validated it, and I'll come on to that later. That we do look at the benefits of internal and external shading. And of course in continental Europe here, you have far more external shading than we do in the UK, but what we're trying to show here is that both have a place in keeping buildings cool. The whole issue of heat retention perhaps has become more in focus in the last few weeks, where we've had a very, very strong winter across Europe, and of course we then have these enormous temperatures that we're seeing in Australia, and this whole issue of climate change is perhaps becoming more focused, but heat retention is a key one. And to change the perception, I mean, Dick mentioned this, that blinds and solar shading are often seen as a finishing touch, as something that's nice to have, and what we'd like to do is raise solar shading up the specification agenda. The other idea of Shade Specifier is that it gives indicative savings, but if there is a genuine interest there from the architect or the designer, it gives them access then to further modelling so that they can do some specific details on their building. And let's be honest about this, whilst we all would love to save the planet and we're all here to do that, ultimately we want to increase potential sales and obviously promote the industry. So those were the objectives, the 10 objectives of the Shade project when it started. We couldn't have done it on our own. We had to link with 2 partners. One was IES, Integrated Environmental Solutions. They are world leaders in virtual environment software. with offices around the globe and heavily used by building services engineers. And we also employ the services of a company called Sonergy. Professor Hutchins, who heads up that company, was one of the team on the WIS program, and he has extensive experience in material testing, particularly glass. He does a lot of glazing testing, and he is on this project in terms of validating the data and the outputs from the modelling system. This is where this is perhaps not as accurate as one would like, but if you bear with me, I think we have an issue at the moment, or we had a perception issue with solar shading, and we also have, as Dick has accurately said, you know, the blinds and shutter trade is very much atomised across Europe, whereas the heating, ventilation and glass companies are much, much larger and have a much more powerful lobby. So perhaps the balance wasn't as accurate, but we have, the balance is changing because, he says, oh, excuse me, thank you. The first thing we have, of course, is a significant rise in energy costs, and not only that, an unpredictable energy cost base, which is making it very hard for businesses and organisations to budget. And you notice my seesaw is coming back the other way. We've then got the increasing legislative pressure, which we just heard from Dick and Fabio, and it affects all of us. And then I'm going to swing it right back the other way, I know, which is to add on what we call in the UK, and I don't know how this translates, of corporate social responsibility. That businesses and organisations have to be acting responsibly and be seen to be acting responsibly, and in fact it is now written in our laws that large companies have to report their environmental credentials as they do with their financial accounts. So perhaps the seesaw hasn't changed that dramatically, but it's certainly the time for solar shading is definitely now. Some of these Dick has already pointed out about the cost of oil, as you're well aware. 8 months ago it was $150 a barrel, 3 weeks ago it was $37 a barrel, but I guess, like you, I'm still paying extremely high energy costs. We all know that someone's turning a tap on and off somewhere in the Ukraine, which is affecting supply. And we have a particular issue in the UK in that by 2012 we will import 75% of our gas requirements. And in the UK we use 40% of gas to generate the electricity we use. So it's a very big issue for us because we've been very foolish and we've not invested in gas storage. So we have to buy on the spot market, and that makes it more costly for us. We know about energy consumption in buildings, but of course, as you see from this quote here, which is from our government, is the best way to save energy is not to use it in the first place. And that's exactly what solar shading can do. The legislation, Dick, again, has gone through this well, so I won't concentrate on this, but I'd like to perhaps pick up the two that are UK-based at the bottom here. You will know that the EU trading scheme affects, I think, 12,000 organisations across the EU, which is the largest polluters. In the UK, we have this thing called the Carbon Reduction Commitment, and it is the largest 5,000 users of electricity in the UK, and it is a cap-and-trade scheme. It starts this year and ramps up next year, and you know what's going to happen, and that is that will then come down to the next level of large energy users and eventually become a requirement for all. And it actually publishes annual league tables of those organisations who have performed and those who haven't. And of course we also have in the UK carbon budgets, which I'll come on to later. So what does shade specifier actually do? It actually produces a number of model outputs, and we've been very clever in the UK because we've managed to devalue our currency to that of the euro. So wherever you see a pound sign now, it's virtually 1 for 1. But you can see that we produce savings in energy in terms of monetary value. And the reason we started out with that is because money talks. You can then see, as Dick alluded to earlier on, that you can see that your blinds potentially become a sort of self-financing climate control system. We also look in the CO2, the emissions, but we're also concerned with glare, so we use this visual probability model, which I'll come on to when I show you some screenshots. For us in the UK, conservatories are a very big market. 100,000 conservatories a year are built in the UK. And one of the things that we've shown within this model is how solar shading can reduce the maximum temperatures. And we also have, although I won't be able to show you today because we're just using a PowerPoint presentation, but we can show the effect of the sun path on buildings, both in terms of plan, elevation, times of month, times of year, and you can actually compare one against the other. So you can show an architect how the sun path would affect the model building.